Community Voices is a branch of BLMK that seeks to amplify the voices in the local community. This branch showcases critical topics while connecting and unifying communities. BLMK's Community Voices builds an intercultural bridge that creates a better understanding between the Black expat community in Korea, Korean citizens, and all other immigrant communities in South Korea. Interview topics explore a wide range of subjects, including Korean international adoptions, Korean labor law, Black influence on Korean music, and families living in Korea. BLMK is committed to educating about the importance of Black lives, highlighting Black excellence, and making a difference in the community.
James, welcome, and do you mind starting off with an introduction?
Thanks, Terry. I'm glad to be here. My name is James Lockett. I'm from Dallas, Texas. I'm a member of the Democrats Abroad Global Black Caucus. I serve as a vice chair. I'm a Texas voter, and I'll tell you about the Democrats Abroad Global Black Caucus. It's made of DA members from all
religion. The point that changed for me was when after I had baby 2, I felt that my side of our family was being lost because I felt that I had to speak Korean only to my kids, and
I hope so.
Okay, so let's just jump right in. In your experience, when looking at a new employment contract, what are some of the biggest flags, the biggest red flags that foreigners should look
at? Labor contract, employment contract has been changed according to the
vaccinated abroad. Are they allowed to, is there a way where they can get their vaccination registered here in Korea or recognized?
Oh, well, in Korea, there is an application named Koob, so we can...
Foreigner, people usually, try to show sympathy towards me, or, they say they want to help somehow, but on the job side, it's like, how can you work? How are you going to do your work? You have a child. If your child gets sick, you're just going to go back to your country? What? No.
The name. And Usikgung is my Korean traditional just music restaurant. Just maybe we sell soju baekju and Korean traditional food. But music is every weekend just came to a lot of DJ and control to a lot of jobs.
Hello, welcome to BLMK's Community Voices. Today we'll be talking about Korean adoptees, and we have a moderator with a panelist of speakers. The moderator is Ben Coz, and he will take it away. Ben?
Thanks, EJ. Thanks, Erin, and thank you, BLM Korea, for having us today. My name is Benjamin Coz. I'm an adoptee from Minnesota. I've been living in Korea for roughly a total of 8 years. My educational background, I have both a bachelor's and master's in social work, and I focused a little bit more on international adoption, so the topic we're going to be covering today. I'm also formerly the community organizing director for Solidarity Political Engagement Adoptees Korea, and currently a member of Adoption Solidarity Forum, which has different parties and people involved within international adoption, different stakeholders, so to speak. So without any further ado, let's get into it. I'm going to share the screen now. So today we're going to be talking to Han Boon-Young, Cory Lemke, and Min-Young Chang. And I, of course, will be facilitating. And we're fortunate enough today to have Young Chang with us, and he is a domestic adoptee. So we're also getting a domestic take on this as well. And just to be forewarned that this is a very dense topic, so we're covering a lot, and I recognize that this might be the first time some people are approaching this topic. So just know that it's very vast, and we're going to do the best we can to at least give a glimpse into the multifaceted layers that go into adoption and experiences and politics of it. So here's a quick overview of our panel today. I'm going to give a brief historical look at South Korean international adoption. Our panelists are going to introduce themselves. And then the second part of today will be a panel discussion with the people we have here today. Okay, so let's look at international adoption from a historical glance. And mind you, there's a lot of fast forwarding and parts that we can't cover just for the sake of time today. Around 200,000 adoptees have been sent overseas. The exact number is actually not known, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. Some of our panelists might also cover that as well. But roughly 2/3, a majority of them were sent to the United States. If you just think about the Korean War and Cold War politics and the United States involvement, it sort of theoretically makes sense here. Predominantly 15 different receiving countries and to mostly white families. Korea is the longest sending country and has sent the most adoptees overseas of OECD nations. And according to the historian Arissa Oh, who I cite frequently in this presentation, there's been 3 waves of international adoption. The first would be categorized right after the Korean War. So a lot of mixed race children, war orphans, etc. The second wave would have been during the industrialization period of Korea, starting under Park Chung-hee and then continued under Chon Do-an. And the third wave, a little bit more ambiguous, but it's loosely categorized as adoptees that have had access to Korean history, culture, and language. And again, I really want to lean into this idea of Cold War politics. We're at an interesting time right now, especially with the United States exit from Afghanistan. So just thinking about foreign policy and US foreign policy and how that influences other parts of the world. So you can see there's a list of these countries, 15 of them. New Zealand is over here. And again, you can see predominantly to the United States. And mind you, this is dated. This is taken from the Ministry of Health and Welfare in 2004. Please note that the number is actually much higher according to most adoption scholars, I would say. And this is largely due to falsification of records and just a lot of really not well-tracked record keeping. And there are some pretty big and blaring ethical concerns related to that, which we'll probably go into our panel discussion. So please stay tuned and check out the second part if you're just tuning into the first part here. So I want to make it a point to connect it back to domestic, US domestic policies and how that sort of played an influence on expanding international adoption to getting to this number of 200,000. So in 1972, the National Association of Black Social Workers declared interracial adoption cultural genocide. So this suddenly sort of made adoption and predominantly white families that were looking to adopt children, it made it a lot more controversial to adopt Black children out of homes. And then subsequently, you had the 1978 Indian Child Welfare Act, which gave tribal sovereignty of Native children. So again, this idea of these protection and sovereignty and people really trying to act in the best interests of children and protect their cultural lineage and history and ancestry. Meanwhile, over in South Korea, just to give a timeline of this, you had the 1970s and Park Chung-hee, and under his administration, which really spearheaded this idea of a state-led, export-oriented, pretty repressive government. This is where industrialized international adoption starts. And you had 4 main adoption agencies, which you can see right here: Holt, SWS, KSS, and Eastern Child Welfare Services. Sorry, there should be an N there, as you can see. And it should be noted that during this time as well, 50% of the labor force were women. So if you think about a lot of the factories, industrialization period, you can't bring children to your work. So this also sort of started to answer, that was served as an answer to that. And then 1980s, Chon Do-an became president, and his government vastly industrialized international adoption. And the thing that I think is really important to emphasize here is that this brought in a lot of revenue to the South Korean economy. So you can see 20 to 40 million US dollars per year throughout the 1970s and 80s. And you have to remember that this is foreign currency in the absence of long-term, ethical, transparent social welfare services. To go back to these four agencies, they all had very specific and still do have very specific status that is largely outside of government regulation and being audited for the amount of money coming in. I think the current amount to adopt a child out of Korea is between 20,000 and 40,000 US dollars. And I'm going to cover this a little bit more in another slide. So the thing I want to impress upon people is that there are economic incentives and that child welfare policy in America sort of carries over and influences and create this perfect timeline over here to open up the floodgates for international adoption. To really quick quotes Arissa O. I'm not going to read the full quote, but as you can see, there's a geopolitical reasoning for this, right? So it's to strengthen US-Korea relationships. And in her own words, it sort of strengthens the neo-post-colonial ties between the United States and South Korea. And 60s and 70s, it created a surplus of children because of war-torn status and everything following that. And this is, again, going back to those ethical concerns and social welfare. In the context of weak social and child welfare policies, it served as a response to this. So that was a more zoomed out view, institutional level. Now, if we look a little bit more localized, meso and micro, what are the motivations to adopt? Well, you had the whole idea of the blank slate idea. We can mold a child to be and socialize them how we would like them to be in our family or our society. The model minority myth, especially in the United States, lends itself very strong here. Not going to go into the definition. You can read it here, and you're more than welcome to research that on your own time. And there's also, since its inception, international adoption has had this humanitarian element to it, and mostly Christian, if that. The idea of saving children, of being benevolent in the times of like post-war or disaster crisis. And as you can see here, Asian children, specifically Korean adoptees, were seen as not too different, exotic, yet still assimilable. And more pragmatically, and I think more modern times, it's like the idea that some parents can't have children. So adoption serves as a response to that. In South Korea, it's very complicated. You could say that the conception of adoption, the concepts around adoption have some strong cultural forces, specific Korean cultural forces, such as patriarchal blood lineage being very important. There's a lot of stigma, I think, that still exists around this topic. The definition of open adoptions are completely different because of this emphasis on blood lineage. And since the late 1980s, there has been a huge stigma against single mothers, and 90% of all international adoptions come from single unwed mothers. So there is an intimate link between adoptees and single unwed mothers. And needless to say, this creates a lot of pressure on the mothers because of the family structure and societal pressure. And even to this day, there is not very much support. And I believe that fathers actually have to go into a government office and register themselves as a member of the child's family in order for them to have to pay child support. So it's not greatly incentivized. So again, to go back into the economic part of it, there is an uncomfortable part of this, of international adoption, that I think we have to confront, that is transactional in a lot of ways. And again, going back to the idea of like having a savior complex, saving children, being gifts from God, and more adoption has become very normalized. And in order to sort of address like ethical qualms, you have this narrative of like a sacrificing birth mother wanting their child to have a better life. And I think it's important to keep in mind that adoption agencies, adoptive parents, these are two of the parties that have the most and loudest voices within the narrative of adoption. And oftentimes adoptees, we don't actually have our own voice or autonomy, and many of us have even like a specialized areas of education and professionalism in this area, yet we still do not have the same control over this narrative. So that leads into some of the activism that I think a lot of adoptees are now currently engaged in, and some of them are actually on our panel today. So it's really important to ask ourselves the question, who's constructing these narratives and why? To get into our panelist introductions here, first we have Han Boon-Young from Denmark, we have Cory Lemke from the United States, and Min-Young Chang from South Korea. And all of our panelists are actually currently residing in Korea, also including myself. So first, if Han Boon-Young, if you'll be so kind as to please introduce yourself briefly.
Yes, I'm a Danish Korean adoptee. I came back to Korea almost 20 years ago. And from that, or since that, I've been involved in adoption in different ways as a scholar, as an activist, as today as a panelist.
Next, I'll have Cory Lemke. Please introduce himself.
Sure. Hi. Yeah, thanks to BLMK for hosting this and Ben for moderating. I've been in Korea for about 8, going on 9 years now, so it's been a while. I'm involved with Democrats Abroad, Republic of Korea, which is more on the American side, but I've also done some research in sociolinguistics related to the Korean adoptee community.
And lastly, we'll have Min-Young Chang introduce himself, please.
Hi, he's Young Chang Min. I'm Korean domestic adoptee, and I'm 49 years old. I'm running the domestic adoptees group in Korea, and I'm working with 3 major parties of adoption, adoptee and adoptees parents and unwed mother, which major adoptees group we are working with, and 2 other supporting groups we are working, professor and lawyer. And we are trying to change the child welfare, and not only adoptees, but also all child in Korea. Thank you for the invite.
Thank you to all 3 of our panelists for being here today. And we'll just start off leading into this for part 1 is just some icebreaker questions. So the first question I'd like to ask all of our panelists, what kind of adoption related work do you do? And the second question will be, please tell us how you got involved. And the third question is, what's something that you hope the audience takes away today from this discussion? So let's start off with Han Boon-Young, please.
Yes, thank you, Ben. So I'm currently doing my PhD in social work here in Korea. I'm trying to finish my dissertation. Have been trying that for many years. I'm writing on adoption. I'll say before I came to Korea, I was not really politically active, but coming to Korea and seeing these contradictions of, the poor Korea, the war-torn Korea, with this hyper-modern society, I simply just didn't understand. And I started questioning really what was behind this very, very famous adoption program. And so that's how I became involved, predominantly actually regarding unwed mothers and trying to help, support, and find ways for women, families not to have to relinquish their children.
Thank you, Boon-Young. Cory, same questions, please.
Yeah, so I've been in Korea for about 8 years, going on 9, pretty quick here. I reunited with my birth family right away when I came to Korea. And started the process of reculturizing, learning Korean, trying to fit into the family. And my political activism, I think, is really informed by that whole experience, both in, on the American side and on the Korean side. I see I always describe it as the life I would have had. And I see some kind of regional sort of discrimination, oppressions that the way power is kind of distributed here in Korea. And I can't help but wonder if my own adoption is related to those same sorts of oppressions here in South Korea. And so my research is really related to that as well, as, what does it mean to be a person from Jeollado or from, another part of the country? And what does that mean for identity creation? And ultimately, what does that mean for us as citizens, as people of different countries? And so that's really kind of my guiding principles for my activism here. And what I would say to people listening in today, and what I would like them to take away, is to get involved. I think, as Ben kind of mentioned just moments ago, who's controlling this narrative? It's one thing, maybe we are getting cut out of the narrative, and, maybe we're being prevented from speaking out and talking about our stories, but we also have to have stories to tell. We better be able to step up and provide those stories when the opportunity like this one comes. So that's what I would say, is go out and go tell your story. Thank you.
Thanks, Cory. And last but not least, Min-Young Chang, if you would answer the same two questions.
As I was introduced myself, I established domestic adoptees group for 3 years back, and I am running with domestic Korean adoptees group for the what's that, the archive of the adoptees voices first, and next we are gathering all the voices of domestic adoptees, how they think, what is wrong, what was wrong, and how can we change. And now we are working with three major adoptees group, as I told, and adoptees and adoptees parents and the unwed mothers. And all three parties has own opinion and own story. We did not know how they difficult with when they young and when they grown up the child and take care of the child. Even the unwed mom also difficult with the take care of their baby. We are gathering all the opinion, all the experience, and we forward to Korean lawmaker. And we would like to change the Korean system, how they care about the baby. Baby is not own of all of the parents. Baby itself should be take care of. That is main part of my job and my working now. And I did not know the Korean domestic adoptees group before 3 years back. We don't have any domestic adoptees group. That's the reason I made myself with other domestic adoptees, and I would like to interest with Korean adoptees, the domestic and international adoptees, and we would like to support from outside of the country, not only country, and outside of the country also. Why many Korean child was adopted to outside of the country that we should take care of, and we should know. That is the hope to understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Young Chang. And something I just want to elaborate on too with what he was just saying is that this is actually in more recent times, just because of, if you remember the slide before, I was talking about some of the cultural forces at play. So the current wave of activism, I would say, going on in Korea is largely in the domestic field right now. And preceding that, there was, going back to Boon-Young here, several decades of adoptee activism that came from the international front, and now it's much more localized. But we'll get in more into that conversation in the second part of this discussion. So if you've tuned in with us thus far, thank you so much for getting a brief glance into this, meeting our panelists. Again, thank you Black Lives Matter Korea for hosting us today and allowing us to have a space for us to have this discussion. And I'd like to hand it back over to EJ now.
Thank you, Ben. I'd like to thank Young Chang, Cory, Boon-Young, and Ben, of course, for talking about such a personal and important topic. Thank you for watching another production of BLMK's Community Voices. And remember, be the change you want to see. Thank you.